After breaking into Master Shinsuke's dojo, James Wright, a former commander in the Royal Air Force, discovers that Benjiro, his enemy from the war, has passed away. Furious that his dojo has been invaded, Shinsuke orders his students to teach James a lesson, but the soldier uses the skills he acquired in battle to defeat all his opponents single-handedly. Seeing his students defeated and humiliated, Shinsuke decides to listen to what James has to say, and he recounts what happened in 1942 in the Philippines. While crossing the battlefield in their aircraft, James and Randall had their aircraft shot down, and during the crash, they managed to save themselves by jumping out with parachutes. After falling into the ocean, James drags his companion to the beach and decides to take him into the forest so that they can both hide from their enemies. In the morning, a group of Japanese soldiers enters the forest to search for them and finds Randall's body buried next to a large tree. At that moment, they realize that James is nearby and go out to look for him. When he realizes that his enemies have moved away, the soldier leaves his hiding place and manages to ambush them. After stabbing his opponent with a blade, James kicks the soldier away and his body explodes when it falls on a mine. Attracted by the sound of the explosion, a group of Japanese soldiers rush to the scene and begin to pursue their target. Finding himself cornered, James drops his knife and kneels. However, instead of eliminating him, the officer decides to take the man prisoner of war. When he arrives at the prison, Hirano decides to eliminate James, since he has eliminated countless Japanese soldiers, but just as he is about to have his neck cut by the sword, the soldier decides to act. After dodging the final blow, he knocks Hirano down, and even with his hands tied, he attacks the other soldiers. At that moment, James manages to free himself from his bonds and throws a knife at the surviving soldier. When he realizes that all his companions have been defeated, Hirano tries to stop the prisoner with his sword, but ends up being eliminated with his own blade. After stealing a small knife, James enters the forest and finds an airplane, but soon realizes that the aircraft is not working and decides to continue his escape on foot. Upon reaching a certain point in the forest, he ends up being caught in a trap and is taken back to the camp. When he receives the news that Hirano has been eliminated by that man, Commander Benjiro sends James to his cell and says that he will get the end he deserves the next morning in front of all the other prisoners. During the night, other prisoners are sent to the same cell as James, and among them is Beardy. Curious to know what brought James to that place, Beardy begins to ask some questions and discovers that the soldier was sent on a mission to support the Allied resistance in World War II. According to James, he and 9 other men took off from a boat in the South China Sea, and when they arrived, they discovered that the Japanese had already eliminated everyone. Upon hearing this story, Gabriel Villanueva, a sergeant in the United States Army, introduces himself and says he was sent to help train the residents of Bataan for war. When he finds out that James will be eliminated the next day, Genesee says that it is not difficult to leave the camp. According to him, the problem is finding out that there is nowhere else to go, and when that happens, prisoners of war always return. However, there is still a way out for James, as any man who is strong enough to work has a chance to stay alive to serve the interests of the Japanese army. About 100 kilometers north of the prison, there is a camp that needs manual laborers, so Benjiro will send some prisoners there. In the morning, when he is about to suffer his final punishment, James is surprised when Benjiro orders his soldiers to free him from his bonds, and sees 3 other men entering the arena. According to the commander, those guys were caught stealing food, so they will serve as an example to their companions. To stay alive, the trio will have to duel Beast and defeat him without using any weapons. However, even though he is outnumbered, the fighter easily defeats them and uses his skills to knock them out one by one. Then James is sent into the arena and discovers that he will have to fight to the last breath in a one-on-one fight against Beast. However, when he approaches James, the fighter takes a kick to the chest and is easily knocked down. When he sees his opponent get up, the British commander prepares to deliver the final blow and manages to knock out Beast with a single punch. Seeing his best warrior defeated in this way, Benjiro is surprised and impressed by the British officer's physical abilities. After the fight, James is introduced to Captain Collins, who congratulates him on being an excellent fighter. While drinking with the other prisoners, the soldier says that he was born in England but grew up in Hong Kong because his father had to move for work. When his father passed away, James returned to England, but it was in Asia that he acquired all his fighting skills. During his youth, James had the chance to train with masters in different countries, such as Thailand and Japan, and thus managed to improve even more. According to Collins, since he arrived at that camp, he has never seen anyone capable of defeating Beast, which explains why the commander was so impressed. That afternoon, Benjiro orders his men to escort James to his office, and upon arriving there, he sees Teresa. Even though he is impressed by the woman's beauty, James remains attentive to what the commander has to say and is surprised to find out that he will not be eliminated that day. Instead, the commander congratulates him on winning the fight and advises his prisoner to enjoy it while he can, because the next day he will have to win another fight to stay alive. At dawn, James is sent back to the arena, and this time he will have to fight 3 Japanese soldiers at the same time. When he hears the bell ring, the soldier kicks one of his opponents and knocks the other 2 down with his fists. However, his opponents quickly get up and soon join forces to try to take down the great warrior. Despite being at a disadvantage, James's skills allow him to remain standing without taking much damage, while knocking out all his opponents with his synchronized kicks and punches. Witnessing this beautiful display, Benjiro is convinced that he is facing the greatest fighter he has ever seen, and regrets the fact that this man is his enemy in war. When the winner returns to his quarters, Collins asks why he didn't eliminate the Japanese soldiers who challenge him, and James says they were just following their commander's orders. According to Gabriel, in a week's time, Benjiro will send new men to the other camp and they will have a chance to escape. The problem is that Collins has a knee injury that prevents him from running, so their escape becomes completely unfeasible. Luckily, James has another idea to get them out of there. All they need is a radio to contact the British Army. If their troops are still on the coast, they can go there to rescue them. Upon hearing this plan, Collins states that his allies know exactly where they are, but are unwilling to risk the lives of other men to try to rescue them. Still, James is convinced that if he can establish contact, his request for help will be granted. With the help of his new friends, he devises a plan to reach the radio tower. After stacking some sandbags, Gabriel and his team start a fight on purpose, distracting the guards while James climbs the radio tower unnoticed. As soon as the soldier successfully completes his mission, the Japanese soldiers use their weapons to stop the fight and drive away all the troublemakers. While the guard returns to the tower, James remains hidden until he finds an opportunity to take the radio to his tent. However, he ends up being seen by Teresa. At that moment, the woman is paralyzed, not knowing what to do, and feels a soldier approaching her, trying to caress her. After pushing him away, Teresa is struck and falls to the ground. Realizing that James has obtained a radio to call for help, the young Filipina's hope is renewed, as she believes he will be able to save her people. During the night, James shares his escape plan with Beardy and tells him how he intends to use the radio to get out of there. Upon discovering that his cellmate understands Japanese, James asks him to listen to the guards' conversations and write down everything they say. The next morning, Benjiro discovers that 2 Filipino prisoners tried to escape during the night and orders his men to use their swords to behead them as an example to the others. After witnessing this horrific scene, Jonesy is shocked and loses all hope of ever leaving that place. However, unlike him, James feels even more encouraged to escape, as he now knows that there is a way to leave that camp without the guards seeing him. If the young Filipinos manage to escape, James knows he can do the same, and he enlists Jonesy's help to find the trail used by the pair. At dusk, the soldier gathers some pillows on top of his bed to pretend to be asleep, while escaping through a passage in his tent. After escaping the camp's boundaries, James flees through the forest, and when Hiroshi realizes he has disappeared, he decides to remain silent. When he reaches the top of a hill, James hears the American army communicating by radio and discovers that they are nearby. Before returning to camp, he checks to see if the glider that crashed in the forest is still working, as he intends to use it to get his friends out of that prison. The next day, after returning to his tent, James shares his discovery with his friends and claims to have a plan to get out of the jungle. Seeing the British commander talking to his allies, Benjiro begins to suspect that he is organizing a rebellion and decides to interrogate him. Unable to extract any information, he orders his men to publicly beat James while his arms are tied. When they realize that the soldier is already weak from being beaten so much, the soldiers decide to release him, as they are confident that this time they will be able to defeat the fighter. However, after being knocked down, James manages to get up and steals a wooden pole from one of his opponents to try to even the battle. Despite being weak and injured, the British commander manages to knock down his 3 strong opponents, as he has spent most of his life developing his fighting skills. Even after suffering such injustice, James decides to be merciful to his enemies, and instead of eliminating them, he uses his superhuman strength only to immobilize the soldiers.
Seeing his warriors humiliated in battle, Benjiro stands up and shoots some Filipinos who were watching the battle. According to him, these guys were lucky to have such a merciful end, because what is to come is much worse. At that moment, James faints and wakes up 2 days later in the infirmary. Noticing that Teresa is taking care of him, he manages to calm down and realizes that his whole body is bandaged. To help him endure the pain, Teresa has been medicating him and caring for his wounds since the moment James passed out. During their conversation, the young woman reveals that she is also a prisoner of war who was separated from her family and forced to work for the Japanese army. The next day, James wakes up with a sword at his neck and discovers that some prisoners have tried to escape. Hearing the sound of gunfire, he realizes that some of his friends may be being eliminated and is informed that he will have to participate in a new challenge the following morning. Confident that he will win another battle, James states that at some point, Benjiro will run out of options, as he will have already sent all his men to face him. When that happens, the British commander challenges his enemy to a personal duel against him, so that they can put an end to the war. At that moment, Benjiro reveals that the American army is approaching the camp and states that if they arrive there, neither the Japanese soldiers nor the prisoners will survive. Later, when he returns to his quarters, James surprises his companions, who were convinced that he would not survive after the countless blows he had received. At that moment, he discovers that a US general has sent a letter to the Imperial Japanese Army, reporting the cowardly acts they have committed against prisoners of war. The truth is that the American army knows everything that has happened to their captured allies, and they promise that the Japanese will pay dearly for violating the military code of honor. While his companions celebrate the fact that rescue is on the way, James fears that Benjiro will reinforce security at the camp, knowing that he will be in trouble if any prisoners manage to escape. If the American army shows up, James believes that Benjiro will try to take all the prisoners with him in an act of desperation. In an attempt to speed up their escape, James and Gabriel decide to go out in the middle of the night to take a look at the glider, and on the way they run into a guard. After knocking him down, James eliminates him so he can't alert the commander about the escape. However, he ends up being caught by Hiroshi. When Gabriel is about to eliminate him, James remembers that this young man helped him, and unlike the other Japanese soldiers, Hiroshi is not happy with the prisoners' situation. Therefore, James decides to let him live, even though he knows he is putting his escape operation at risk. After being spared, Hiroshi helps the pair escape when the other guards aren't looking, and thanks to him, James and Gabriel manage to return to their quarters in time for the nightly headcount. In the morning, Benjiro reveals that one of his men has been found eliminated in the camp, and James immediately takes the blame for the incident to prevent his colleagues from being unjustly punished. However, instead of punishing him, Benjiro says he admires James's courage, but states that this time, one of his colleagues will pay the price for his actions. At that moment, the commander orders his men to attack Collins, and even with his leg injured, the captain does not give up in that fight. After knocking down one of his opponents and knocking him out with a punch, Collins bites another opponent's neck, removing a piece of it. Seeing his friend eliminated in this manner, the third opponent knocks Collins down and begins to stomp on him. Even though he is injured, Collins reacts appropriately and knocks his opponent down. At that moment, opponent number 1 appears to help his partner, and both end up being pushed into one of the tents. When he realizes that his men will end up being eliminated, Benjiro orders the soldiers to intervene, and Collins is declared the winner. A few hours later, while at work, James says they need to send a message to the US Army that night. The problem is that, by doing so, James will end up giving away his position, as the Japanese will be able to pick up his message. To prevent Benjiro from discovering that the prisoners have managed to steal a radio, the British commander decides to send a transmission from the top of a hill. As agreed, that night, while everyone is asleep, James and Gabriel leave the camp to reach the hills and manage to send a message. Upon hearing their request for help being answered, they celebrate the success of the mission and report their location so that rescue can be sent. When they return to their quarters, James and Gabriel realize that their friends have been taken away and end up being caught red-handed by the guards. After being struck on the head, the British commander faints, and when he wakes up, he discovers that the camp is under attack. When he manages to get his bearings, he realizes that he is tied to a chair along with Gabriel, and the two begin to work together to free themselves. At that moment, Teresa and Anna, who also works in the infirmary, appear to free them, because shortly after James was captured, Allied planes began flying over the area. According to the woman, when Benjiro realized that his army would be destroyed, he went mad and began to eliminate all the prisoners. After freeing themselves, James and Gabriel guide the nurses to the tower, and on the way they discovered that almost all the prisoners have been eliminated. Suddenly, they are surrounded by a group of Japanese soldiers, but they don't need to take action, as their enemies are soon hit by bombs dropped by the American army. As he approaches the tower, James notices that there is a guard on duty up there, so Teresa takes a knife from his hands and pretends to be wounded to attract the soldier. As soon as the man approaches, the nurses attack him, and Gabriel manages to access the radio to request immediate extraction for himself and his companions. Meanwhile, James sees his friends about to be eliminated and decides to act. After grabbing a gun, he shoots the soldiers, giving Beardy and the others a chance to escape. After escaping, Jonesy guides the nurses to a safe place in the forest, and Gabriel attacks a Japanese soldier to prevent him from going after his companions. Seeing his friend being attacked, Collins decides to step in and manages to take down his enemy. However, being much more agile than the big man, the Japanese soldier quickly recovers and goes after the captain. While the madman tries to immobilize him, Collins relies on his own strength to break free and throws his enemy onto the sandbags. However, when the American grabs a knife to deliver the final blow, the Japanese eliminate him with several shots to the chest. At that moment, James is hunting down the person responsible for all the cowardly acts committed at that camp. When he finally reaches Benjiro's quarters, he finds him sitting in his chair as usual, as if waiting for his arrival. Upon seeing his opponent, the commander throws a katana at him and challenges him to a duel. At that moment, James has the chance to redeem his honor, and draws his sword to begin his most anticipated duel. After exchanging a few blows with his opponent, Benjiro realizes that he is unable to defeat him, but decides to continue the fight. James then steals the commander's katana and uses both swords to try to eliminate him. When he realizes that the battle is lost, Benjiro draws his weapon, but the Brit manages to dodge the shots and disarm his opponent. While striking his enemy, James is surprised by the arrival of Gabriel, who drags him out of the camp. Seeing the prisoners trying to escape through the forest, one of the guards picks up his gun to eliminate them, but is stopped by Benjiro, who humbly accepts his defeat and allows them to flee. When he reaches the meeting point with his allies, Gabriel contacts American troops and sends a flare to inform them of his location. While the pilots are on their way to the extraction point, James prepares the glider so that his friends can be rescued, and shortly after boarding, he sees a group of Japanese soldiers approaching. At that moment, American troops arrive on the scene, and all the soldiers, including Hiroshi, are eliminated. After finishing off all the enemies, the pilots use steel cables to drag the glider and take all the allies on board to safety. A few years later, James travels to Japan in search of the commander who ended the lives of several of his battle companions, but Shunsuke informs him that Benjiro perished 2 years ago. Upon receiving this news, the fighter turns his back to leave, but is challenged to a duel, as Shunsuke wishes to witness the skills of the man who was able to defeat his father. As expected, in the first few seconds of the fight, the young man, who is a dojo master, is defeated without landing a single blow on his opponent. After feeling the impact of James's fatal blow, and thanks to his benevolence for letting him live, Shunsuke is certain that this is the warrior his father spoke so highly of. As they say goodbye, the young man hands James a medal. According to him, before his last breath, Benjiro said that one day a British soldier would come looking for that item. After recovering the medal that belonged to his father and was stolen by Benjiro during the war, James leaves, as he has just completed his last mission. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.